In our study of the book of Genesis, the Patriarchs part of the book of Genesis, we began in Genesis chapter 12, and one of the first people we met was Abram, who later came to be Abraham. We've tracked with him from chapter 12 to chapter 25. That's a lot of chapters, and in Abraham's life, it was 100 years, a lot of years. But in chapter 25, he finishes his time on earth. Evidently, he finished it well. That's what I want to talk about, finishing well, today on Beyond the Notes. Suicidalism is a bad idea. I'm not going to chase that rabbit all the way around, but you and I can agree that suicidalism is not a good way to finish. However, it's not a bad way to finish as though you know the end is coming. The Word of God tells us it's appointed unto man once to die, and unless the Lord returns, you and I are going to one day face our end of days. Now, it's always possible that it could come very, very suddenly. I imagine I'll still be serving on earth when this podcast episode drops, but I don't have any guarantees because it's going to be a little while. Who knows? You don't have any guarantees either, by the way. But if we know that the years are passing, and if we know that the end is coming, I think there are some things we can pick up on from the life of Abraham that may be useful to us. Just to recap some of the chronology of Abraham's later life. When Sarah died, she was 127, and we know there was a 10-year gap between them. So Abraham was 137 years old when Sarah died. He lived another 38 years after that, because we know from chapter 25, verse 7, that he lived to be 175 years old. So he lived for 38 years after the death of Sarah before Abraham, died. And during that time, lots of things happened. Isaac married Rebekah when Abraham was 140 years old. So Rebekah never met Sarah. When Rebekah comes from her country around to the place where Isaac and Abraham are living, Sarah has already passed away some 3 years before. So she moves into the place of being the matriarch of the family. She knew Abraham for 35 years. If you just lay the math alongside one another, then after Isaac and Rebekah were married, Abraham lived another 35 years. We don't know much about their relationship. There's very little said in Scripture about that, but they overlapped for 35 years. And the twins were born when Isaac was 60 and Abraham was 160. So he knew the twins, Jacob and Esau, for 15 years of the twins' life. And we don't have anything about those interactions either. It's just interesting to put the math alongside. We also know that Abraham remarried. He had no obligation to do so. The covenantal child, Isaac, had been born and was well into adult life. But he certainly had the freedom to remarry because he kept his vows to Sarah, and they were together, one man, one woman. Granted the unfortunate episode with Hagar, but they were married for many, many years, and they were married until they were parted by death. And so there's no sin or wrongdoing in the fact that Abraham remarried and married Keturah, and by her, according to the catalog in the first paragraph of chapter 25, he had 6 more sons, 7 more grandsons, and 3 great-grandsons that paragraph encapsulates. And I know some of you are saying that, well, wait a minute, Abraham and Sarah were both past the point of conceiving children before the birth of Isaac. Well, all I can say to that is when God fixed that problem, he fixed it all the way. And so these additional children happened. All right, that gets us to the point of Abraham's passing. If we get past the first paragraph of chapter 25, the next thing that happens is 25 verse 7, Genesis 25:7. These are the days of the years of Abraham's life, 175 years, and Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. There are 6 things that emerge, I think, from the last chapters of Abraham's life that we would do well to take to heart as we consider that one day our time on earth will end. Some of these are, by the way, very, very nuts and bolts. First thing, and these are in no particular order, the first thing is he made provision for his so-called, I guess, like final arrangements is how the people in the funeral business say it. Back in chapter 23, we saw his meeting with the Hittites, and he bought the field at Machpelah, the cave, at Machpelah, and the provision for his burial place. Sarah had already been buried there. I think that principle translates pretty well. It's an occupational hazard because of the line of work I'm in, so to speak, that I'm quite often with families when someone whom they have loved has either already passed away or is imminently about to pass away, and the issue of planning and arrangements for funerals and related things come up. And it is not a bad thing for those questions to have been answered and arrangements to have been settled sometime prior to the actual passing. It's not a bad thing at all to exercise good judgment and to exercise clear-headed decision-making and to have all of those things put in place. And I've known and loved people who have made conventional burial arrangements. I've known people and loved people who have made cremation arrangements. I've even known and loved people who have made body donation for research decisions. All of those are acceptable, but all of them are best made somewhat in advance. Second thing he did, and you infer this from verses 5 and 6. Verse 5, he gives all that he had to Isaac. We'll talk about that in a second. Verse 6, but to the sons of his concubines, and we explained that on the Lord's Day, that that one of these concubines is actually his second wife, Keturah, the other is Hagar. And the sons of his Keturah and Hagar are in view here. Some of the sons that were just named in the paragraph, as well, again, as Ishmael. He gave them gifts, and while he was still living, he sent them away to dwell separately from the covenantal son Isaac. He gave them those gifts while he was living. A lot of times, especially in families, there are items of particular either actual or sentimental value. And a conversation is had with the older generation about where does that particularly valuable or particularly sentimental thing sort of land among the descendants. One good way to manage that is to make sure that there is extremely explicit documentation that has been widely made available to everybody early, so that there won't be any contention or weirdness about this piece or that piece or the other artifact. I would argue that an even better way to do it is give those things while you're alive. Hand them to the person you want to have them while you are alive. That's what Abraham did. He gave away gifts while he was still alive. So if there's a favorite piece of art or a favorite thing that somebody you know they're supposed to have it when you're gone, don't wait till you're gone. You're not a hoarder. Go ahead and pass it on so you can have the joy of giving and they can have the joy of receiving and saying thank you. I think there's a lot of wisdom in the way that Abraham handled that. Perhaps you should handle it that way as well. Third thing he did is he did have a clear estate plan. Once he did pass away, everything went to Isaac. Isaac knew everything was coming to him. Everybody in the family knew everything was coming to him. Verse 5 of chapter 25, Abraham gave all he had to Isaac. The beauty of that was it was a clear and understood plan. The other gifts he gave away while he was still alive, so they weren't even part of the estate plan. again, as an occupational hazard. I'm around a lot of families after the passing away of someone perhaps in the upper generation. And I have seen a tremendous amount of family dysfunction surface because there was no clear estate plan in place, and people got ugly. I've seen families get broken. Things that become dramatic didn't have to become dramatic if there had been a clear plan in place so that no disputes had any room to arise. And so it was here. And I think as you and I march down the years, and maybe you would perceive yourself to be nowhere close to finishing up, well, that's a good time to start planning because you can do it with a cool head. So he had a very clear estate plan, and I think that's a good idea for all of us. Number 4, he valued his spiritual legacy. We saw it in chapter 24. Now, it might not apply as directly as some of these principles in terms of, okay, you need to go do what Abraham did. Because what Abraham did was put boundaries around the marriage of Isaac. It's probably the case in our time, in our culture, that you as a parent cannot put firm boundaries around who your kid marries. You know that, and I know that as well. But there's an underlying principle. The reason Abraham put boundaries around whom Isaac would meet and marry is because he valued greatly, and in his case was right to do so, the covenantal character of Isaac's life and Isaac's life going forward. It would have been covenantally catastrophic for Isaac to marry someone from a different faith heritage, as most of the Canaanites around them were. So yeah, we don't get to execute that one the way Abraham executed it, but what he cared about is something we ought to care about. And that is passing on to our children a spiritual legacy that our children will marry well. Gail and I prayed for the future wives of our sons from the time our sons were very, very little. And I know some of you also prayed in similar ways, and the outcomes weren't everything you hoped they would be. I am blessed, as is Gail, that our sons, I'll leave it at this, we feel that we hit the daughter-in-law jackpot in pretty much every dimension with the 2 amazing young ladies that are our daughters-in-law. But the part of that matters most is to see that our grandchildren will be raised by parents who love Jesus. Now, again, you can't absolutely control that. I get that, but you can care about it, and you can pray like you care about it. You can conduct yourself like you care about it, and you can feel the burden to do everything you can for your spiritual legacy. Number 5, he stayed connected to his family. This catalog of additional children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren that are born even after his first wife's passing is illustrative. But even more illustrative is the fact that Ishmael shows up in 25:9. We haven't heard from Ishmael in a few chapters, and Ishmael shows up to be a part of the burial of Abraham. What I'm not saying is, for heaven's sakes, always go to the funeral. What I'm saying is the fact that Ishmael felt that he could come to the funeral, and given a lack of modern communication, what that means is Ishmael was still in touch with the family. Ishmael was kept in the loop when it came time for Abraham's funeral. He knew about it, and he cared enough to show up, and the connections were good, and the family was as connected as it could be, even given the difficult circumstances of Ishmael's birth and the fact that Ishmael had been sent into exile at God's command. Abraham still cared about Ishmael, his firstborn son, and that ongoing caring apparently went for the duration of Abraham's life. And then finally, number 6, the implication that he died in a good old age and full of years and was gathered to his people. the author of Genesis, Moses, writing sometime later, is telling us that Abraham finished well. He died as he had lived, a man of faith. He was gathered to his people in his death, and that is an implication that his life was ongoing. And by the way, it was. Abraham is alive today in the presence of the living God. Perhaps one day I'll have the chance to shake his hand. I'd love to meet him. But given that his life was going to go on forever, his time on earth, well, he lived as he died as he had lived. He died a man of faith as he had lived a man of faith. So to recap real quick, he made concrete provision for his final arrangements. He gave away a lot of the stuff while he was still alive. He did have a clear estate plan. He gave real thought to his spiritual legacy. He stayed connected to his family as best he could, and he died a man of faith as he had lived a man of faith. That's not a bad blueprint for finishing well, which I hope is not happening to you right away, because I hope you will continue to tune in for these episodes. I hope you've subscribed by now. I hope you're sharing them, and we look forward to being together again on Beyond the Notes.